Welcome to No Boxes, Just Verses, the podcast where we go beyond the bios, beyond the titles, and we explore the lessons that have shaped today's most inspiring voices and leaders, all through the songs that have moved them. Each week, we build a playlist of a leader's life. 5 lessons, 5 songs, 1 unforgettable playlist.
Let's put the pedal to the metal, let the top lean back. I don't know where we're going, I don't know what we're running to. I'm checking for you, how you feel about that. I think it's time we rendezvous.
And today I'm joined by a trailblazer who's been called the summoner of women's audacity. She's mobilized millions and influenced elections and continues to remind us of what's possible when women tap into their collective power. Please welcome Shannon Watts.
Hello, Shannon Nash.
Hello, Shannon Watts.
My twin, my Gen X twin.
My namesake twin. It's so good to see you. It's been a minute, and I can't wait to just catch up on all the amazing things you've been working on. I've been following and cheering you online. So I'm so excited we get to spend a couple of minutes together and learn a little bit more about your journey.
I'm so thrilled you're doing this.
Yeah, well, you're a big inspiration, so we'll get into it. But first, you know what? Let's get into your bio. Shannon Watts organizes and mobilizes women to create political, electoral, and cultural change. She was named one of Time's 100 most influential people. Wow. A Forbes 50 over 50 changemaker, a Glamour Woman of the Year, a Worth Magazine Worth 100, and a 2025 Parents Next Gen Award winner. That's a lot of amazing awards. And so I can't wait to get into what that felt like to be recognized by places like Time. That's just amazing. She's the founder of Moms Demand Action, the largest grassroots group fighting gun violence in the United States. And during the 2024 election, she organized the largest Zoom gathering in history, mobilizing over 200,000 voters and raising $11 million in support of the Kamala Harris campaign. She co-hosted the weekly Women Wednesdays for Harris Calls with Indivisible. And her most recent book, Fired Up, How to Turn Your Spark into a Flame and Come Alive at Any Age, was published in June of 2025 and became an instant New York Times and USA Today bestseller. This book led to the creation of Firestarter University and Bonfire communities, online and in-person gatherings to help women tap into their political, professional, and personal power. Shannon, wow. I can't wait to get into your story, but welcome to No Boxes, Just Verses.
Thank you, Shannon. When I think about how much time we spent in sweaters, in the heat, in line, waiting to get into the Oprah Winfrey show, that's really where we bonded.
Yeah.
It was very, very warm.
It was it was significantly very, 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 I feel like it was 100 degrees. But yes, I can't wait to share that story, which, is obviously later on in your lessons, and how that fortuitous meeting led to a photo for the ages. That's what I was.
Yeah.
But let's back up a bit. So where is a young Shannon? Where does she grow up? And what is she dreaming of? Because the song that you pick, and so you, again, both of us being similarly aged, this was a very popular song in the 80s, Girls Just Want to Have Fun by Cyndi Lauper. And for Gen X, I think it really represented freedom to be who you wanted to be as a girl and have ambition and all those things. And so I'd love to understand why you picked that song and what was a young Shannon dreaming about?
I was born in upstate New York in a town called Rochester, and it really was a place where so much happened in the suffrage and civil rights movements. There were so many activists who either lived in my town or who passed through my town, everyone from Harriet Tubman to Frederick Douglass to Susan B. Anthony. And as kids, we were taken to their homes or to where they gave speeches. And we were taught that these were great people, right? That they were important people. I think that is where I learned this idea of activists as being something to aspire to. And I remember when that song by Cyndi Lauper came out, it was in the early 80s. I was I think a preteen. And She was talking about feminism in a way that was like pushing back on her dad and her boyfriend and just saying that she wanted to be independent. And I can remember dancing to it at sleepovers. Like, it was a fun, great song, but it also had meaning to it because there were so many women at that time who were becoming activists for their own rights, right? My mom couldn't have her own credit card, I think, until 1979 without my dad signing on for it. So it was just sort of this age when women were coming into their own and getting the generational promises that had been made, that they were finally following through. And so for me, I think that song was fun, but it was also feminist. We lose sight of that. And one important moment in my childhood was when my dad, I think I was like 10 years old, he gave me a t-shirt that said, "Girls can do anything boys can do." And it wasn't amazing because it was like, oh yeah, I can. It was amazing to me because I didn't realize there was the perception that women couldn't. Girls and women couldn't do everything that boys could do. It was kind of when I realized, oh, there's this inequity. And all of that comes together for me with that song.
It sounds like your parents, maybe one of the reasons why you didn't realize that is because your parents always told you could do what you wanted to do. Sounds like you grew up in the household where they were just like, there's no limitations.
Yeah, I do think that's the case. As in all homes, it's more complicated. My mom was 18 when she got married. She was 21 when I was born. But I was an only child, and she was sort of that generation, having been born in 1949, that was starting to see rights and freedoms that her mother didn't have. And I think, like so many of us, assumed that we would just keep getting more and more rights and freedoms. My dad is interesting because he grew up, he was one of 5 boys in an Irish Catholic family, second generation Irish. And one of them had to be a priest, right? That's just like the way it goes. And it was him. And so he went into the seminary when he was 13 years old. And he was there for over a decade. And he ended up deciding he was not cut out for the priesthood, but he was always very Catholic. And that was a big part of my childhood, going to Catholic school, going to catechism, going to mass. And the other formative moment, I think, in my childhood was when my dad took me after mass to go talk to the priest because I desperately wanted to be an altar boy. I saw the altar boys and I just thought that seemed so important and so ritualistic. And you got to stand in front of the church. And I just remember the priest saying, no, that was only for boys. Girls couldn't be altar boys.
And what did that do to you?
It made me not really understand why I would be Catholic. And I understand that's not everyone's experience, but for me, it was like, why would I want to be part of a religion that
Oh.
doesn't hold me at the same standard or in esteem as they do boys and men? I think that always stuck with me. I actually ended up in my 30s becoming a practicing Buddhist, a secular Buddhist. But for me, I just always thought, I don't know that I want to be in a society or religion or culture, whatever it is, that does not hold women at the same esteem as men. And maybe that's a little bit of the seed of who I became.
I definitely think it's a little bit of the seed of who you became, but it's interesting where it starts, right? So you growing up in Rochester, you at some point decide that you're going to go to college. And so your next stage, you pick the song Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears. You go to college, you have some struggles. You share openly, you have shared that you struggle with ADHD. But I got to tell you, because we're similarly age, people didn't really talk about ADHD like that when we were growing up. Like you were either just like really hyper or disorganized or lazy. Like there were all kinds of descriptions, but it wasn't like ADHD was widely like discussed. So I wonder if you could share what that was like and how you finally use that. You use that to actually empower you into kind of like your young adulthood, your college years, and even like your first jobs.
As far back as I can remember, I was getting in trouble for not being able to focus, for talking too much, for having very little impulse control. I was different. And in fact, in many ways, I was more like a boy than a girl, I think, in my behaviors. And my recollection of ADHD in the 80s is that boys were seen as having ADHD when they struggled, and it was often physically hyperactive, and girls were just never diagnosed and they were seen as problematic. They weren't good. They weren't the typical behavior of a girl. And we've come to realize that hyperactivity can also be anxiety. It can be hyperactivity of the mind. For me, in addition to all of the behavioral issues, by the time I got into middle school, I began to fail classes because I would even have a tutor who would do my homework with me. And then I was so disorganized, I didn't hand it in. Because it was the 80s, because this was not widely diagnosed, particularly in girls, because there was a stigma around treating it, even though I was diagnosed at 14, that's how difficult it was that my parents took me to get diagnosed in 1985. I wasn't treated, and I lived with the stigma from my family, from my educators, from my school, basically society, that made me feel like I was lazy or that I was stupid or that I was sort of a hopeless failure. That was how I felt. It didn't get much easier, in large part because my parents didn't really understand that I had ADHD, even though looking back, my mother clearly had it too. I really struggled to get through high school. I graduated by the skin of my teeth. I didn't even get a cap and gown because I was certain I wasn't going to be allowed to go to the ceremony. But an economics teacher had mercy on me and gave me a barely passing grade, and I got through high school. And then I took a year, and my prefrontal cortex was starting to finally harden. And I was able to get through a year of community college and do really well because I found most people with ADHD, when they find something they're passionate about, they can focus on that. And I was really passionate about being able to choose the classes I wanted to take and being interested in those classes. And so because of that 1 year doing well in community college, I applied to University of Missouri, which is the best state school for journalism in the country, and got to college, couldn't get through J school because of ADHD, right? There were all these classes I didn't like statistics, etc. So I ended up minoring in it and majoring in sociology, but that was really a blessing in disguise because I learned so much through sociology that I was able to eventually apply in my activism. But I think the reason that song resonates with me so much, first of all, it was such a huge hit. It was my stepfather's very favorite song. I can just remember it constantly being on the air. And it was this idea of everybody wants to rule the world. It was when I started to feel ambitious. I started to see beyond what other people thought was a drawback or negative. And I started to see it as my special sauce, the skills that I had that could make me successful. And it wasn't what other people had. But I started to finally see, oh, I actually know how to make myself successful. And that's a possibility for me that I never saw as a kid.
And so literally turning that ADHD into something that you could hone and actually use to be successful. That's a period where you actually learn about that. That's powerful because that I do think changes a lot of just your whole career path and certainly your success. And so around this time, before you kind of start your jobs, you become a young parent yourself.
Yes, I talk about this in my book, Fired Up. My parents' marriage, as I said, my parents married very early, especially my mom. And so it's not shocking in hindsight that their marriage ended up not making it because so many marriages fail, especially if you get married young. And so when they had been married about 25 years, their marriage just imploded. And for me as an only child, it was pretty devastating because they both quickly found new partners and remarried. And it felt like our nuclear family was irretrievably broken, and it was. And so, in reaction to that, also in hindsight, I think that I was clinging to my college boyfriend. And I thought, okay, if I don't have this family, I'm going to start a new family. And so I married right out of college. I was 23 years old, which I have kids now. I can't even picture them being married at 25 or even in some cases 30. And I had 3 children by the time I was 29 years old. I really was not on the typical timeline, even of my generation. But I think there's something to be said for having that kind of pressure on you so early. I was the breadwinner, and it really made me doubly determined to succeed because I had to pay the bills and I had to put food on the table, literally. And so I think the reason that I was so successful so young was one, I ended up in a career that I was really good at, right? I ended up in corporate communications. I knew how to tell a story and build a brand. Like that was something I was excited and passionate about. crisis. People with ADHD are great in a crisis. And I did a lot of crisis communications. And I also felt like I needed to step up. And so those two things together, I think, turbocharged my drive.
Let's double click on that because you wind up you get promoted to VP at a public relations firm before you even turn 30. And like you said, at this point, you have 3 kids. The song is What a Girl Wants by Christina Aguilera. But let's think about this. People always talk about, do you have work-life balance? And this is conversations that you and I both are in all these leadership groups. And these women are in their late 30s, early 40s, having that question. You're in your 20s. I had 3 kids as well, but mine are way spaced out. There's 11-year gaps. I had my first child at 27 and that was overwhelming. And so I'm just trying to put myself in the space of in my early 20s, having like kids every 2 years or something along those lines and having a job and being a breadwinner. Shannon, that's a lot. How did you get through that?
It is a lot. And on top of that, I have this disability that is not treated. And also, I think my brain learned to work around it. So maybe I could get a really big project done at work, but there was also a laundry room full of unfolded clothes that I was just pulling out of the dryer because I just didn't have the bandwidth. I couldn't afford, a nanny. I couldn't afford a housekeeper. And so I really think that it was a very stressful time. I didn't realize how stressful it was. And I talk about this in the book too, right? Like I ended up having all of these chronic illnesses, including untreated eczema. Like it was there was nothing that would make it go away. I thought that was just an illness I had, but I do think that I was just so overwhelmed and so stressed out. And what a girl wants, I wasn't really sure what I wanted. I thought I wanted career. I thought I wanted success. And I found myself like going 100 miles an hour down the highway without really knowing that I wanted to go in that direction, without really acquiescing to that. It's just happened for me. And so it's not really that shocking that I got to my mid-30s when I finally knew who I was and I realized, oh, wait a minute. This isn't the person I would have married if I'd waited to get married until I was mature. This isn't the career I necessarily would have picked if I had not had to make that decision right out of college. This isn't the life necessarily. I love my kids, but I also had to look at what I wanted and to decide, is this the way I want to live the next so many decades of my life?
And that's by 35. That's a critical turning point because you've been working for, let's say, I don't know, 15 years, something along those lines. You've got another, let's say, 15 to 20 in you. That's like where you have to really either double down or you might get stuck doing something just because you put too much time into it and it's too hard to start over. So you wind up making a pivotal decision, right? To start over. You burn the whole baby down.
I did.
And you leave a relationship. You decide to leave corporate America, which at the time, because I've had one of those pivots, your friends and supporters, and there's lots of people in your life who are like, you're making the biggest mistake of your life.
Yeah.
Why are you doing this? But you step away in 2007, you meet a new person. So talk about that. And you decide that you're not going to work for a while. It turns into 5 years. I'm not sure you planned it to be 5 years. But before we go into what that leads to, first, what was going on then? Because I'm sure there's a lot of uncertainty and self-doubt and fear and all of those things at that time.
It comes back to the eczema that I could not treat. And I was in an emergency room. Just again, when you imagine every surface of your body covered in eczema, you can't sleep, you can't work, it's hard to parent, like you're just so uncomfortable. And the doctor looked at me and said, how much stress are you under? And I tried to make a joke, like, how much time do you have? And he just would not release eye contact. He was doing like a mind meld. And I had a mini nervous breakdown in his office. I was sort of realized I was at a crossroads, right? I had made all these choices that got me to where I was, and I was overwhelmed and I was unhappy in my marriage and in my career. And I knew that I did not want to keep going forward in this direction, but I also knew there were so many consequences and collateral damage to make a choice to go in a different direction. It was after that appointment, I couldn't really afford a therapist. I couldn't confide in my husband because our marriage was part of the problem, that I just began journaling and really journaled my way toward, it became a roadmap, my journal did, in many ways, for what did I want. There's a reason women don't ask themselves, what do I want? Governments would topple, institutions would crumble, family systems would fall apart. I dared to ask myself that question. What do I want going forward? And I just knew that I was going to have to do things differently. And it was really difficult to extract myself from a 13-year marriage where I was the breadwinner. It was difficult to share custody. It was difficult to leave my job and not really know what was next. I'm grateful that I met my husband, and I'm grateful that I had that time to experiment in retrospect. But when you're going through it, it feels like the world is falling apart.
What were you leaning on during those times to get you through?
First of all, more time with my kids. I had been so busy as a full-time worker that I was doing a lot of the work, and my husband at the time was doing a lot of the caregiving, and that was never kind of what I wanted or intended. So being able to do that, I got to experiment with other things in my life, whether it was my Buddhism or my passions, things that I was interested in, and I could start to explore more. I became a consultant for a while. So, I was making a living working the hours that I wanted for the people that I wanted to work for. So it was a really important time because it helped me see what I did and didn't want to do, but it wasn't easy.
Oh, there's no way it was easy because to your point, especially when you're a consultant, like you eat what you make. So it's
Yeah.
all you. Now, again, your background was in communications and PR, so you knew how to sell yourself. And I even tell my young adults that, like, if you know how to sell yourself, regardless of you know how to sell a product, you know how to sell
Yeah.
anything, is one of the most valuable skills that you can have. So you had that. And so that training certainly helped you through that period. So the song you pick is No One by Alicia Keys. You meet your now current husband, and now you have to blend a family because he has kids. But like I said, you've walked away from this job. You're kind of out there doing some consulting yourself, but it's a pause that I'm not sure you intended for it to be 5 years, but it winds up being 5 years. So take us through that time. And those 5 years wind up changing the trajectory of your life. And I dare say we wouldn't be on this podcast right now had you not taken over those 5 years, because there winds up being a critical moment in 2007 that sparks you into action.
Yeah, the song No One by Alicia Keys reminds me so much of, the early days of my relationship with my now husband. We both loved that song and it was so anthemic and we were just madly in love. We had worked together. We lived in different cities and both ended up extracting ourselves from our marriage. And he came to town. We hadn't talked for a long time and he came to town and invited me out for drinks. And it was like, oh, this is my person. This is,
You knew that quick. Oh, you had
oh,
been friends.
we had worked together and we had known each other, but having him invite me out to drinks and realizing that we had a friend relationship, but that night it was like, oh, this is my person. I knew right away. And that song was so popular at the time. And it also speaks to me making him the center of what I was going to end up doing. I had never done that before, to make a romantic relationship the center of my life and our family together. He had two children. I think in the time they were in middle school and high school. Mine were elementary and middle school. So they ran the gamut. There was like a 10, 11-year age gap from the youngest to the oldest. And so I just decided I'm going to take 5 years off. I'm going to focus on our family. I'm going to blend our family together. That is what my focus will be for the first time in my life. I think when we got married, I was 38 years old. And I really did think, okay, let's see what 5 years does. It'll give us a chance to kind of all come together and then I can reassess. And it was the end of those 5 years when I had just dusted off my resume, was thinking about what was next. I can just remember very clearly. It was a very cold day in Indiana. I was folding clothes and suddenly there was news on in the background that there was an active shooter inside a school in Connecticut. And like so many people in the country, I just stopped what I did and watched this horrific tragedy unfold. And I went to bed in tears. I was just inconsolable. And at some point during the night, that sadness turned into abject rage. I knew I had to do something. I really didn't know here I am, a mom of 5 living in suburban Indiana. What am I going to do? And I knew how to create a Facebook page. I had 75 Facebook friends, so it wasn't like I had a huge following. And I just created a page that basically said, just like mothers took on the alcohol lobby in the 80s through Mothers Against Drunk Driving, it's time for women to organize around this issue of gun violence in this country. And when you hear about something going viral, that's exactly what happened. My 75 friends shared it with their friends and on, and I never imagined I'd be a public figure, so it was very easy to give me a call or send me a DM or an email and say, oh, this speaks to me. I want to get involved. And so within a week, I think I was on the cover of USA Today. It was just so organic the way that it unfolded.
And then even in doing the research for this, I was surprised that an organization like that hadn't already existed. Because like you said, I remember MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. And I think I just assumed that a lot of those type of organizations already existed because of the fact that we had seen those, you and I had seen those as young kids. They've been around for a long time. So I was surprised that this did not already exist because school shootings certainly had happened for Sandy
Yep.
Hook. Now, to be fair, Sandy Hook was like big one because this was like elementary kids, not diminishing other shootings, but it was, like you said, I do remember stopping watching CNN and being horrified in a way that I hadn't remembered in a while. So it was a big deal. But the fact that didn't already existed is interesting to me. But it led you to an action. And one of the things that I think is interesting about your 5-year pause and having that background in communications and PR is that it was like all this stuff was building you for this moment because
Mm,
although that Facebook page wound up becoming viral very quickly, I truly believe that you were the right person, the right time to lead that movement because you had the corporate skills as somebody who had run PR, but also you had spent literally the last 5 years of your life doing what? Not only intentionally diving into being a mom, but understanding and talking to and being around other moms. That's what
yep.
you were doing
Yep.
at schools, right?
Totally. I often meet women through my organizing or through my book tour, and they say, oh, I could never do what you did. You must be a born leader. And that always makes me laugh because I knew little to nothing about gun violence prevention. I knew nothing about organizing. I really knew very little about the political system or the legislative process. We already talked about having ADHD. I also am an introvert, and I had a debilitating fear of public speaking. So not exactly anyone would look at and say, oh, that woman over there, she should take on the most powerful, wealthy special interest that's ever existed. And yet I was exactly the right person for the job. As you said, I had spent decades honing my career and craft in how do you create a brand? How do you tell a story? How do you write a message? That was what made us look so credible so quickly. And we really had this sophisticated way of being in the world that made it seem like we had been around forever. Now, I'm grateful that all of the women I met through starting Moms to Win Action, complete strangers from across the country, brought their amazing skill sets to the table. They were lawyers or organizers or researchers or violence preventers. Like there were just so many different kinds of people who came to the aid of the organization to say this is needed. We do need something like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, but for gun safety. And I really had already led by being a manager in companies and I knew how to do it. And so I'd never led volunteers before, which is a little bit of a different animal than paid employees, which I came to learn. But I do, as you said, I do feel like I was able to meet the moment. And I talk a lot about this in my book. I call it the FIRE formula. And it's this moment, and hopefully this happens many times throughout your life, but it's when your values, abilities, and desires come into alignment. Those three things, right? My values were to protect my family and community. My abilities were my communication skills, and my desire was to stand shoulder to shoulder with an army of badass women who wanted to protect kids. And that was really how I figured out who I was and what I wanted at 41. And I ended up doing that work for over a decade. And I think the through line through my organizing, my career, my activism, my teaching is the empowerment of women. Because that, if you go back to when I was young and I realized, oh, I'm a feminist, I believe women should have equal pay and equal rights and equal freedoms and equal safety. That is the through line through my life.
It is completely the through line of your life. Let's get into the book in this current stage because, like you said, you did that for a decade. And then from there, it propels you into something that is on a global stage. But you not only were prepared because you'd already run that type of playbook, it was like the culmination of something that little Shannon I know would be proud of big Shannon for doing. And that let's get into this is actually how we meet. The song you pick is Birds of a Feather. We go from Girls Just Want to Have Fun to Birds of a Feather, right? Because Girls Just Want to was like really an insular kind of, I just want to be empowered. Me, I want to be empowered. And that you need that. This is a career path that leads to now I want to really empower millions. And you wind up doing that because you organize a call for Kamala Harris. You have a book called Fired Up, How to Turn Your Spark into a Flame and Come Alive at Any Age. And boy, do you come alive at over 40, over 50 even. You're shouting out for everybody who thinks it's too late is not too late. And then you start a community. You start another community, Firestarter University, right? So I want you to get into all of that, what you're working on now, for sure.
When I started Moms Demand Action, it was really important to me that I not see it as an infinite amount of power, that I was going to hand the torch over eventually because they call this founder syndrome, this idea of when you found something, your ego becomes so enmeshed in it that either when you leave, you want to burn it all down or it can't survive without you. And I did not want to have that with Moms Demand Action. I wanted this to be an organization that lasted into perpetuity, but I also knew I wasn't able to do that work for an infinite amount of time. It's really difficult this is a benefit of the ADHD is that I was able to go down these rabbit holes and basically work 15-hour days, 7 days a week for 11 years. But at the same time, it's exhausting and you get burned out and you become traumatized in many ways, right? Because you're constantly telling stories about gun violence and you're reacting to mass shootings. And it is very heavy work, even if you're not a survivor, right? In America.
And how big does this organization get? Because it actually scales like tremendous.
11 million supporters now.
Yeah.
Right. And so it just became this huge behemoth. And I made it a practice to ask myself every year, is this the year I step back?
I see.
And in the beginning, it was no, because we were starting up. In the middle, there was always something, a shooting, tragedy, or a piece of legislation I needed to stay to work on. And it was really standing in the Rose Garden in 2022, watching Joe Biden sign the Bipartisan Communities Act into law, the first federal gun safety legislation to pass in a generation, that I felt the inner knowing that it was time for me to step back, that like my activism had run its course and this was going to be the bookend to that. And so I went back and I told my team that I was going to give them a year. I was going to say goodbye. I was going to hand the baton over to somebody else, but I was leaving. And I thought, okay, I'm going to just take a break. I'm going to take up some hobbies, something, because 11 years is a long time to work as a full-time volunteer on this, right? And so what happened was actually that I was running on a treadmill one day and I saw a call come in from Maria Shriver, who I didn't know. And I do what anyone would do. I hit the emergency stop button. I jump off the treadmill and, take her call. And she says, I have a book in print and I'd like you to write a book for me. And I said, okay, about what? And she said, just what you've learned about women through your career in activism. I was like, oh, that's a lot. And I ended up narrowing it down to this FIRE formula that I figured out in my early 40s and that I had helped thousands of other women enact in their own lives and that I really wanted to scale because, we're so fortunate in our generation to have this second act when our kids go to college or when we make a career change or we go through menopause. Like we have a whole second half to live. And that was really the genesis of the book, Fired Up, How to Turn Your Spark into a Flame and Come Alive at Any Age, I was thrilled, to make the bestseller list. And even more thrilled that we have 1,000 women signed up for Firestarter University, where we're going to spend the next year going through the book. If people are interested in that course in the future, there's a wait list they can join. But that's a really exciting part of this, to be able to empower even more women through Firestarter University. And then there's these bonfire communities. And I think that's why Birds of a Feather is such an important song. I don't think anyone can live on fire alone. And again, I'm an only child, I'm an introvert. But what I realized, particularly in my 50s, is female friendship is so incredibly important. It's different than my friendship with my husband. It's different than my relationship with my kids. It's really a balm for burnout in many ways, but it's also that supportive community, whether it's work or Moms Demand Action or the Zoom for Kamala Harris, or now these communities, like having a group of women, what I call a bonfire, there to support you throughout your life is so important. And
Yeah.
that's one of the most important lessons I've learned.
Yeah. And look, Shannon, you're a supporter for so many people, both just one on one and then just the millions you've had influenced. Who was your supporters?
I am very, very fortunate that I was introduced to a woman named Lucy McBath just a few months after I started Moms Demand Action. So Lucy's son, Jordan, was murdered just before the Sandy Hook school shooting tragedy, just weeks before. And someone introduced Lucy and I in the spring after the Sandy Hook school shooting tragedy, just probably 4 months after her son was killed, 4 or 5 months. And her dad had been a member of the NAACP. Lucy had already, as a grieving mother, gone into activist mode and was saying, like, I need to tell Jordan's story. I need to share it with people because I want to prevent them from experiencing the same kind of pain and tragedy. And as soon as Lucy and I were connected, I was like, oh, wow, this woman is like a force of nature. And I said, would you be a spokeswoman? I didn't know what that meant. I didn't have any money to pay her. I just knew that we needed to amplify what she was wanting to tell the world. We ended up creating a chapter in Florida that way to help Lucy through the 2 trials. The first was a mistrial of the murder of her son. And then Lucy was a flight attendant for Delta for 30 years, and she quit her job. She was living in Atlanta. She came to work for Moms Demand Action. She was just an amazing spokesperson and faith leader for the organization. And I can remember every time we would have a conversation, I would end up by saying, okay, when are you running for office?
Right.
And eventually Lucy called me. It was right after the Parkland shooting tragedy and said, I'm running for Congress. Like, I thought she'd run for city council or state house. Lucy had much bigger designs. And even when she told me that, I was like, there's no way she wins as a Democrat running on gun safety in a conservative area of Georgia where Newt Gingrich was the Congress
Yeah.
member for over 30 years. Like, it's a Republican seat. And she won. And she's now been serving in Congress for over 6 years. But Lucy really took me on as a mentee and was always guiding the organization and making sure that we were being thoughtful. You were talking about whether people paid attention to school shootings. And I lived in suburban Indiana, and it took a school shooting to get me off the sidelines. But I had been ignoring the gun violence that's happening 30 miles away from my house every day. And it was really Lucy who opened my eyes to that, to say, this isn't about AR-15s only. This isn't about background checks only. This is about the majority of gun violence in this country, which happens with handguns in city centers. And we have to make sure that we're thinking about gun violence holistically and that the solutions are going to protect everyone.
I do think what a powerful person and force to reckon with, and just how you were able to bring together people like Lucy to come and join this movement. So Shannon, you and I actually met through what I would call the apex of some of your activism. As I mentioned earlier on, you wound up setting up these calls, White Women for Kamala. You raised a lot of money, and we both got an opportunity to go to an event that Oprah was hosting. And we wound up meeting each other, sitting next to each other, realizing we had the same name and all of that. But it's what really happened. This is the tea behind the scenes, is when we got to the venue and you had to go through all the security and all of that. We were with a group that was going to go take a picture with Oprah. And you and I both had to go to the bathroom.
Yay, menopause.
I know. We couldn't hold it. We couldn't hold it. And so the Secret Service said, for the people that have to go to the bathroom, you have to get out of the group
Yep.
line and you have to walk to this place and go to the bathroom. And so we did. And by the time we came back, the group was gone.
It was such a bummer. We couldn't find anyone. No one would take us back to where everyone was. Like, I had started the Zoom and I couldn't even get back to where all the Zoom leaders were so that we could, I think they were taking a picture with Oprah and Kamala.
Yeah.
And kind of people looked at us and shrugged their shoulders. And then finally, it was like the parting of the Red Sea. I see my friend who works on the Kamala Harris campaign, and she's like, "Oh, I will get you right back there." And she put us in a special line. And I don't think we even knew what the special line was. Like, and then suddenly we get to the front of the line and we realize you and I are going to get to take our picture, not just with Kamala Harris, but also with Oprah Winfrey. Just the four of us standing together, having a conversation.
And let me tell you guys, listeners, when you're in the special line, which again, we don't know what this thing is, we're both like, because we're looking for the other people we're with.
Yes.
They're gone. They're nowhere to
They're
be
gone.
found. They walk us in, and then somebody announces, and they go, "We have Shannon Nash and Shannon Watts." They go, "The Shannons."
Yeah.
And we walk in, and y'all, let me tell you, both Oprah and Kamala go, "Shannon Watts." That happened. That is real. And they're like hugging her. And I'm like, I'm just so glad to be Shannon Watts' friend and get in this picture because, and they start, and again, it's a, I won't go into all the conversation, but it's a very personal conversation.
Yeah.
And it goes on for a while and all these pictures are taken. And that's
Never
the
would have
back.
had that opportunity if we hadn't gone to the bathroom.
It just never would have happened like at all. So sometimes it pays to just be Gen X and have menopause. Wow, so many powerful things are happening for you and what you're doing for community. I want you to share, how can people follow you? How can people support you? What's next? What are you working on next?
You can find me on most social media platforms at Shannon R. Watts. I'm also on Substack. It's called Playing with Fire, and that's where we do a lot of our Firestar University work. What's next? It's a great question. I'm still on book tour. I get requests to run for office quite a bit. I don't know if that's in my future or not, but I do think that there's a moral imperative right now for women to run for office. We only hold about 25% of the 500,000 elected positions in this country. So if you're listening, please consider running. And yeah, I'm waiting to see what comes, letting the game come to me, as they say.
If somebody is interested in that activism and that, whether it be, and by the way, we need lots of people to have this activism at the local levels, right? That's where you're
Yes.
going to see
Yes.
day-to-day change in your life. What advice do you have for them?
Figure out what your values, abilities, and desires are. That's really what I talked about in the book is personal, political, and professional. And if you know what your values, abilities, and desires are, it will lead you in the right direction. We all have a different set of each, and they change throughout our lives. So don't think that it's hopeless or that you're helpless. It's never the case. And as you just said, like right now, so much of the change that we can create is local.
We always ask our listeners also, what is that one song that makes them happy? This brings a smile to your face.
This is an easy one for me. And my kids would tell you right away. Come on, Eileen. It's a song that I play on my birthday. It's a song that I would like played at my funeral. Come on, Eileen is just the best vibe.
I love that one. As soon as you said it, I smiled. I was like,
Yeah.
come on, Eileen.
I think it was their only hit, but it's a
I
banger.
don't even know who sings it. That's the crazy part. I just know the song. I know the words.
Yeah. It's Dexy's Midnight Runners, I think they're called. Dexy Midnight Runners.
I don't know, but that's one
I
of
think it is.
those. It's a good jam. I'm glad.
Yeah, it's a good
one.
jam.
No one's picked it, so okay, that's definitely high on the playlist. It's been such a delight to get Shannon's journey from really focusing on a corporate career, but knowing that this was not her passion, but you got to do what you need to do, learning some amazing skill sets that wind up serving her when she decides to dive into her passion, which is activism, and propels her to a completely different level as a world-known figure, as we just said, on Time's 100 list. I will say this, for a deliberate 5-year break, like the one Shannon took, to really run a family, to really focus on her personal life, it turned out to be the exact perfect preparation she needed to launch a movement that mobilized hundreds of thousands of people, raised millions of dollars, and then went on to basically change the course of not only her life, but millions of other folks. And so I ask you, listeners, what unrecognized opportunities are you sitting on right now in your current routine, in your current life, or even in the pause that you're experiencing if you've left a job that you may be overlooking or undervaluing? It's really something to think about. And that's a lesson, Shannon, that you have taught us in spades. So I thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. I really am so grateful to be with you.
Your playlist, like you, is just amazing, expansive, thought-provoking, but also a bop. Like, I love to bop.
An 80s bop, mostly.
An 80s bop, which I love. We're certainly going to support your book, Fired Up. In fact, I can't wait to see you so I can get me a signed copy. I need a signed copy of that book.
Of course.
Happy to, listeners will have the links for Firestarter University and Bonfire in the show notes. Again, it's one of those just really inspiring things. You had kids young. That could have been the end of the story, but thank you for showing us the map, really, of being able to pivot at any age. So let's recap your songs. You first picked Girls Just Want to Have Fun. Next up is Everybody Wants to Rule the World, followed by What a Girl Wants. After that is No One by Alicia Keys. And then finish that up with Birds of a Feather with the bonus song of Come On Eileen. Shannon Watts, thank you for the playlist. Thank you for the lessons. Thank you for being on No Boxes, Just Verses.
Thank you, Shannon.
And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening to No Boxes, Just Verses. And if this episode moved y'all, please share it, rate us, follow the show on your favorite platform, and we can keep building our leadership playlists together. So you can find me, guys, on Instagram as Shannon Nash1 and No Boxes, Just Verses on Instagram. You can also find me on LinkedIn as Shannon Nash ESQ CPA. You can also find No Boxes, Just Verses on LinkedIn. You can visit our website at noboxesjustverses.com. Finally, don't forget to check out the show notes. The show notes are super important because this is where the playlists will live. You will be able to get these playlists on Apple and Spotify. You'll also be able to follow up and see how to reach out to the guests, follow them, and support them. Until next time, I need you to stay unboxed. You come for the stories, but you stay for the playlists. I'm Shannon Nash, and I'm out.